This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest on the podcast today is VP of Operations for Bell's Brewery, John Mallett. Welcome to the podcast, John.
I'm super happy to be here with you.
I'm glad we could make this work. We're here. Actually, this is the fourth podcast in our history. We're 118 episodes in. This is the fourth one we've recorded here at the office.
Oh, really? All right.
Yes.
Well, now I'm feeling even more specialer.
Yes, you are. I've missed you for the last year or two when we haven't done our retreats here in Colorado. We haven't gotten to spend some time together. I did see you last weekend up at the Big Beers, festival in Breckenridge. But yeah, glad to have you here right here in Fort Collins, en route out to Portland, Oregon for the Hops Conference next week.
Yeah, looking forward to meeting with all those hop growers, brokers, merchants, researchers. I mean, it gets pretty hoppy.
I think by the time this airs, that will have actually already happened, but only by a couple of days. We're gonna talk about a whole bunch of stuff on this podcast. Obviously, John's written the book on malt, so we're gonna talk about malt. We're gonna talk about craft malt. He's also built a very specific brewing system for Bell's that I can't wait to talk about a little bit more. It is one of the weirdest, biggest, craziest production brew systems that I have ever heard about. He's going to walk us through why he has built it that way to brew the kind of beer that they brew, So we're gonna get into the weeds a little bit with John Mallett here on the podcast. But first, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. Thinking outside the box, whether it's a simple relocation of the utility connections for a complex buildup or ground-level design and engineering, G&D is ready to meet the challenge. They're big enough to produce and small enough to care. Call G&D Chillers to discuss your project today or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. Also, kickstart your innovation with Old Orchard Craft Juice Concentrates. Old Orchard knows that a strategic seasonal release calendar means higher margins, increased taproom traffic, and secured shelf space for your brand. That's why they collaborate with countless breweries on product development conversations year-round. With unique flavors like watermelon, rhubarb, pineapple, and plum, the possibilities are endless. Get your Old Orchard sample kit with free 6-pack cooler at www.oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, if you enjoy learning about brewing, I want to tell you about our Craft Beer and Brewing online learning program. Go to learn.beerandbrewing.com. We've put up some fantastic classes with some of our favorite brewers in the world right now. Most recently, Corey King of Side Project Brewing, teaching a class on brewing barrel-aged stouts. That's learn.beerandbrewing.com. It's right there, geared towards home brewers, but I've heard from plenty of pros that are learning from it too. So check it out, learn.beerandbrewing.com. John Mallett, thanks for joining us right here in Fort Collins at our Craft Beer and Brewing office.
It's a pleasure to be here. Ripping in, ripping through, ripping out.
Let's talk a little bit about your history through brewing. That's kind of where we get this thing started off with. Walk me in 2 minutes through your arc of brewing history.
Sure. So, like many people, I was very interested in beer in college, and I was living with a bunch of food and beverage professionals in Boston, and this is about the time when small brewing first started getting going, probably about 86 or so. And I found out, I was sort of cooking my way through college, and I found out that Commonwealth Brewery, which is now long since defunct, right down by the Boston Garden there, would hire from within. And so I went and I got a job in the kitchen, and soon after I got an opportunity to work in the brewery, and took a big pay cut to do so, but got in there. And then very quickly there was some staff turnover, and I found myself with Steve Slesser running the brewery. We were in there for only a couple months, and I mean, it was a shit show, as they say. I made some fantastic Flanders Red. Unfortunately, we were supposed to be brewing in British styles, and
Sure,
look at that pellicle. So I did that for a number of years, and then I went off to Siebel. And when I got done with Siebel, I went on to Washington, D.C. area, Old Dominion Brewing. Kind of ran that program, grew it up fairly quickly, and we had some fantastic brewers that went through that program and are still very active in the industry today. And then I decided I'd start a company, and I went in a direction that I started building breweries. So designing and building breweries. I had a fantastic fabricator partner in Ohio. We had a equipment shop out there that employed a bunch of people, put in breweries and did brewery capital projects and could have reformed that business a little bit. And in the end, I worked on everything from building a 1 million barrel Yuengling, oldest brewery in the country, onto a
never heard of them.
Yeah. Onto a incredibly automated, very small scale, like basically brewed less than a keg of beer, but was measured in many dollars for a large malting concern. And then at one point, I realized that I was not spending any time with my young kids, and thought it's time to maybe get off the road a little bit. And at that time, Larry Bell came to me and had told me, I'm going to build a new brewery, and Mallet, you're going to build it for me. And I went there to do that, and I found that I just thought that the beers and the culture and all that was fantastic, and I've been there ever since. So that was, we were scheduled to move out of our Washington, D.C. apartment on September 12th of 2001. And so that gives you a sense of when that was. Unfortunately, they wouldn't let us bring a moving truck that close to the Pentagon on the 12th. Not sure why.
Yeah.
So ever since then, been at Bell's and, came there, built a brewery, new production facility out just outside of the center of Kalamazoo, and have been operating that ever since. And it's been just a fantastic, awesome ride working with incredibly talented staff. So that's my brewing in a nutshell.
Talk to me a little bit about how that development for Bell's has proceeded over the last few years, or at least the last decade. Over that time, you got into working for Bell's when they were considerably smaller than they are now. Obviously, even over the last 5 years, Bell's has dramatically increased in production, opened up new markets, and kind of ridden the success of these brands that you've, I guess, had some part in helping to create, and kind of built this broader success for them. Talk to me a little bit about in that sense, designing beers that can be produced at a high, at this kind of level of flavor, and on the kind of scale that you do. That's something that not every brewery of that size is really able to accomplish. And it says something for what you all do.
Yeah, I mean, I think about, when we're making beer at Bell's, and, I will tell you that, so many of the great ideas spring from the fertile pen of Larry Bell himself. Sometimes those brewing direction might be need some interpretation, but we've got the staff to do that. It has been just fantastic to develop the process about how we make beer and the choices we make. Everything from raw materials, how they're processed, how we think about things like handling yeast and making sure that the beer just really sings. It is absolutely a collaborative process throughout that whole team. And I feel blessed to work with such smart people. On the end of how we make beers, you think about, when I think about beer, we're yeast farmers, right? We're really trying to set up a party that our guests are just going to rage at. And that is, that's really thinking about like, what are the primary things that they need to be happy and to be successful, and that we're going to be able to keep that replicating that process. I think, when I was in brewing school, it was impressed on me that, you could make a great beer. But if you didn't make it twice, then you didn't really make a great beer. You made something variable. People are going to go out there. They're going to reach for what you're making. If they like it, they're going to reach again. And if it's different, then you really haven't satisfied them. That's not the expectation. So how do we build in the kinds of things that we can make great beers and make them really consistently?
So what does that look like then for you? And I think you're absolutely right on that. There's the idea of creating a recipe, and any chef can create a recipe and they can make that dish once. But you're also thinking about, how do I take this idea for a recipe and think about it from how do I maintain consistency in the ingredients year after year that are coming into this brewery from disparate sources at times, so that it still becomes the same thing, even though I've got, malt coming in from, different places, different people, different times, different seasons. I've got hops coming in oftentimes from different growers, even if they're the same variety, different kind of terroir, and then you've got, yeast, which is moving through different generations through all this process. Talk to me a little bit about how that kind of maintaining consistency reflects itself in how you develop these beer brands themselves.
Sure. So when I'm thinking about, we're going to get beer as an output, and if we can stabilize our inputs, then, we're and the processes that we handle within the brewery to do that, then we're going to get a consistent output. When I think about the biggest potential variation we have there, it's absolutely raw material. And I think that's especially the case with Bell's because, as a brewery, we're very, I would say, naked in terms of we don't use really like process aids or a lot of heavy process or, I really think our beer is absolutely at its best when, as a brewer, you pick up the beer and as you sip it, you can practically see all the way back to the field that it came from. I think about, that has everything to do with, material selection. You mentioned that, with hops. And I think about, the hops in particular, there's, in addition to just the terroir, it's how ripe are they? I was talking to somebody the other day and was looking for a good analogy. And, you and I may both like bananas, but if I like my bananas with little brown spots on them and you're more like the, fairly green banana, our idea of a great banana is going to be different. They could be grown in the exact same place. And, eventually, my banana was your favorite before. And the banana you're eating now is going to be one that I like later. So selecting those pieces are really important. I think also about, on the malt side, it's really about understanding like function of malt and how the individual variety expresses, like what some of those analytical measures that are in there are, and then how that expresses and how you get out what you need as a brewer.
Talk to me a little bit about validation. A brewery your size, this is something that I find fascinating. Maybe only I find this fascinating. But thinking about,
we get really nice comments back from our fans all the time. I mean, it's very validating.
You order these things, and you know what you are expecting to come in. But for a brewery your size, a small brewery, you get a batch, you open a bag of hops. Do they smell like you expect them to smell? Yes. If they don't, you throw them on the hot side instead. For Bell's, the kind of volume that you're talking about and the truckloads of malt and, the kind of quantity of hops that you're dealing with, this is a constant thing. And, you're talking about incredibly large amounts of ingredients. What does that process look like for you all to make sure that the things coming in are what you expect them to be?
Yeah. So I think about, if you're thinking I'm going to talk about Centennial for a minute because it's, my favorite hop. It's the only hop that's in Two Hearted. It's one that we spend a lot of time with.
It's the only hop in Two Hearted, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. If there's a different hop in the beer than Centennial, then it is not Two Hearted, and it would it would either kiss the sewer or become a new product.
So, what kind of Centennial is there? Is there a specific picking window for this? Is there a specific terroir that you have idealized for it?
Yeah, so our program, I feel so incredibly fortunate that we have the ability to have the program that we have. I will tell you that I think we were looking at some numbers the other day, and I think that we were purchasing and putting into our beers about 10% of the global supply of Centennial. So I kind of think about when I'm thinking about Cascade, I'm thinking about Ken Grossman and the awesome team at Sierra Nevada, and they sort of really know that hop, and hopefully we do the same with Centennial. How we manage it. We use a variety of both merchants. So those are larger concerns that are going out and buying hops and, kind of managing that. You think your Haas's and your Steiners and your Hop Union. And then we also do some smaller grower direct stuff, and that's not as large, but we think it's important to have those touches. When we're out there, we are looking for a picking window. It's usually a little bit on the earlier side. And because we've worked with these vendors for so long, they sort of get it. So, it's funny. There's one grower that I love to go into, and they'll lay out, these different cuts, and we go in there and rub them. And then we finally, we have this funny thing where we all rub them. We all take our notes privately. We sort of stroke our chin whiskers or whatever one does to really think hard about it. And then on the count of 3, we all just point to what the best lot on the table is. That's the lot that Bell's, is what's going to, meets the Bell's sort of ideal. And, when we're all standing there and 1, 2, 3 and point, and at that point, one of the people in that room who had done the pre-selection. She's like, I knew it. There was a real point of pride in knowing exactly, what we were looking for. And so showing us the appropriate material is really important. From there, when we buy hops, we do it, and again, it's this kind of goofy way that we buy everything in bale form. So they're raw leaf hops. We take all the bale information down, so we know it's this grower number, this lot number, and then we manage that all the way through pelleting. So we sort of privately contract with a pelleter, and we send one of our quality people out to watch that, so that it'd be kind of like going to the stock auction and being like, "That's a good looking cow."
Can't wait. Watching it all the way through, getting ground up, and
well, if you were like, well, that's a great cow, that's going to make great hamburgers for us, send us the hamburger. You'd be like, is that that same cow? So, I mean, it's not like we don't trust them, but we're interested in that whole process of making sure that they're taken through there. So it's those are things like making sure that when they are processed, that the bag integrity is there. If you have air holes or leaks or whatever, then it's going to cause the hop to not taste as good. So how do you make sure that's the case? You go there and you talk to the operators who are actually doing it, watch them. How often do a test? Can you show me the test? Oh, this is kind of cool, So, I mean, those are some of the pieces that we've got in this, in this pretty integrated and high touch supply chain for that particular hop. And in the same way, we're talking about barley and turning that into malt in similar ways. I have a very good sense of how those barleys move through those malt houses and where the opportunities are.
What does that mean?
So, for us on an annual basis, we will go and visit every malt house that makes malt for us.
About how many malt houses is that?
So we do, and this is for larger, we're not going to every foreign or place that we're getting like a couple bags from. But we'll drive out to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think I went to 7 malt houses last year, and walk that process through. And I actually, funny thing is, I recently went to the Dice Dojo in Chicago, which is like a Dungeons and Dragons place, and I bought myself a set of die. So there's the common 6-sided, but there's also like a 4-sided and a 10-sided and a 12-sided. And I did that because I want to take a look at a random part of the brew house or of the malt house. I guess the malt house is really just an extension of the brew house. So I want to take a look at a random part there. And so we'll say, hey, we want to look at under what they call the subcompartment. We want to look underneath where the germination is. And that's like a place that's, can be more difficult to clean. It gives you a real good sense as to, how they're doing. Are they paying attention to it? There have been times when you find some stuff that you're like, WTF. But for the most part, what that does is it signals to the maltster and to the people who are working in the malt house every day, hey, we're really paying attention to this. So going in there and understanding,
so your malt house's worst nightmare, is that what you're saying?
I don't know that we're the worst nightmare. I mean, I heard some pretty fun stories when I was, earlier there was an old thing where you would get like a loaf of Wonder Bread back when there still was Wonder Bread, like just spongy, nasty Wonder Bread, white. And you take that through the malt house and you find some black mold and you take that Wonder Bread and you wipe it down, and then one would supposedly present it to the, say, plant manager and say, would you eat that? And supposedly the correct response was, yes, I will eat that now. So, that's, is sanitation being paid attention to? Yeah, absolutely. So, those are the kinds of things we want to look at. You don't want nasty stuff going on. And, again, with the
you guys are making, there's the food safety aspect to what beer makers are making is there, and it is important. Obviously, alcohol will generally kill that, and at the end thing, it's not going to be a toxic thing. But having said that, if you start cleaner, then you can end, in a place that you're much more happy with. And that's certainly not the kind of stuff you want in your process along the way.
No, I mean, you really want to have I really want to have a good sense as to what's happening there. And that, again, it's interesting that in Germany, when you take your diploma, it's your diploma in malting and brewing. They are all just one process. There's a physical and a temporal dislocation, but it's really all the same process of turning barley into malt into beer. It's all the same. So what's that extension? That's an extension of my brew house. I like to keep the brew house clean. The malt house should be clean.
Let's dig into that a little bit more. But first, the founders launched SS Brewtech with a very clear goal to advance brewing equipment design, performance, and quality to the very highest standards in the industry. With a team that draws upon strong functional backgrounds in brewing science, mechanical engineering, industrial design, supply chain, and manufacturing, SS Brewtech has the people and skill sets you'd want and expect from your supplier of pro brewing equipment. Head over to ssbrewtech.com for more information on their brew houses and brewing gear. Also, did you know the breweries that serve food see an increase in revenue of 1.8x? Second Kitchen is a food tech startup that connects local breweries to iconic neighborhood restaurants to help provide your brewery with food experiences to keep customers in your tap room longer. Second Kitchen provides the technology, support, custom menus, and more, all at no cost to your brewery. Talk to me a little bit on this malt piece. Now we've talked about the kind of quality and how you evaluate some of your suppliers. Talk to me now a little bit about even thinking about hoppy beer, how you are building an idea of character and malt around this. I think this is something that every brewer is trying to face, as they are building, beers with all of these components, big yeast flavors, big hops flavors. It's very easy for that malt component to kind of get lost in the shuffle. Talk to me a little bit about how you work and how you think about building that kind of character in malt without some of what we now know about oxidative effects of caramel malts, particularly in hoppy beers.
Sure. So if I think about, when I'm thinking about malt, I really want to think about what the end state of the beer is. And, if we're making all malt beers, then, we're doing really two things. We're in malt, we're both servicing the needs of people in terms of making flavor and alcohol. But we're also servicing the needs of the yeast, which are making so much flavor, and especially in hoppy beers. So we want to present the right buffet for that wild party that we're about to throw, and that buffet needs to be well balanced. When I think especially about the way that malt, what we're getting out of there, we're getting both carbohydrates, so, sugars, both fermentable and unfermentable, but we're also getting all these proteins, and those proteins are broken down into, amino acids. So we've got our free amino free amino nitrogen, FAN. These are scraps, but they're food. And if we overfeed that, then we're going to get beers that are not as stable. We're going to do, the yeast is going to want to grow in different ways. So really thinking about how do I set the table so that we've got the right balance of fermentable, non-fermentable, and FAN is sort of where this starts. Interestingly, I did some work a while ago where I was looking into malt specifications. And if you look at, like, say, Belgian malt specifications, there are all malt brewers over there that are making these beers that, have got very, very low protein levels. And when the barley's grown, the barley grows and it puts on both carbohydrates and also proteins. And then as we go through the malting process, some of those proteins are broken down into the free amino nitrogen, so the FAN that carries through to beer. So we could end up with a barley that's got a moderate level of protein, but when it's fully modified, when that malt is fully gone to expression, a greater or lesser percentage of it is actually going into solution. And one of the tale of two barleys is that you could have something where you've got a fairly high amount of protein to start with, and a higher percentage of it that goes into that free state. So at that point, you're like high and high. Or you could have something that's lower and has got the lower percentage. And if you look at the malt specification that you really see this in is called the Kolbach index. And that Kolbach is soluble protein over total protein. And it can range anywhere from, say, 37, 38% on up to the mid 50s. American brewers have, over time, as we made these adjunct lager beers, very big, they've gone towards greater and greater levels of FAN. That FAN level is also corresponds with a higher level of enzymatic activity as well. So if you were looking to drive a mash that had a high percentage of another, an adjunct carbohydrate, that you're going to have enough enzyme in there to fully convert these other extract sources. And in the end, if it's a 50% adjunct, you could have 200% of the FAN, and it would be the same as if you had that all malt beer at that lower Kolbach or lower FAN level with the European malts. So trying to get the mix together of what we're looking for is important to get to get that beer in balance, and that has everything to do with barley variety. Those barley varieties do have different levels of Kolbach when they're fully modified, and so understanding what the variety you're buying or what the maltster is giving you is important. And oftentimes there's a blend, but to be able to read a malt analysis and to see like how this malt's going to perform in the brew house, it's absolutely critical. The analogy I use for this is, I'll ask the faithful listener, I have a 60-pound dog. Is she overweight? And your next question is
sure.
It's like, what's so if you're looking at this malt spec and you're like, is this Kolbach okay? Well, what's the variety? 60-pound Pomeranian, not so good.
These are, we start talking about such strange and small numbers when we start talking about, that it for normal brewers, that becomes a hard thing to wrap heads around. Like, you're also talking about differing levels of efficiency depending on how you're brewing and, what format you're approaching this through. It's almost too much math, for some normal folks. Is there a way that you can kind of simplify the thinking around this?
Well, I think that, if I was operating, as a fairly small brewery, and, it's clearly you're not going to, march up to your malt supplier and say, here's the blend that you need to provide to me. But just having that conversation about, how sort of how hot or how, modified that malt is, or what it should look like. And most importantly, even like, what's the blend? I mean, are you
You're saying blend of barley varieties in any kind of batch they might deliver to you.
Sure. Yeah, it might be some Conlon, some Metcalf, some whatever, all coming together there. So if that's changing, that's important. And again, you don't need to control it, but you just need to understand, like, is there a change? What's happening? In a crop year. You think about a crop year where we've got.
Are you saying, John, it's not just all like two-row pale barley, and that there's all of this other variety within everything that everyone is getting?
It's like white people; they're all the same.
That's true. White people are all the same.
Yes, you and me, brother.
Yeah. So from your, what is that kind of range then? And some of these barley mixes and these barley varieties that we're seeing now grown and then moving through the kind of the world of maltsters. What does that look like? And from your perspective, having dived in deep on this kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think that I think the largest place that we ever see this is when we start utilizing continental and English varietals. And, if you think about how much adjunct beer is brewed in Germany under the Reinheitsgebot, right? So those barleys are set up to be different. You think about an older variety, something like Barca or something like this. These barleys are different than, this supercharged enzyme machine coming out of, the Canadian prairies.
Right.
And I think about those varieties, and I hesitate to call something like Maris Otter old because Maris and I are about the same age, but so that modern variety called Maris Otter
still in your prime,
absolutely. So these barleys are fundamentally different, So I think as any brewer who has played it all, and this is by far most brewers have played it all with different barley varieties. That Maris Otter handles differently than, your X, Y, or Z modern American malt.
In what way?
Well, I think that the Maris Otter, I think in a couple ways. The first way that I think you see that is that the Maris Otter just tends to be handled differently over there. They are killing it for more flavor. They're allowing that flavor to come up. They're not looking to make something that, makes water look dark, right? So therefore, color and flavor are inexorably linked. So number one, if we're buying Maris Otter, we're seeing something that is, got more color and more flavor to it. It also has, I think about the modification, allowing that malt to maybe it modifies out just a little bit differently, a little bit more, when it's fully ready, and therefore it just tends to release extract easily. It's a super easy barley to brew with. The problem with it is that it's expensive. And the reason why it's expensive is it's an older variety and it doesn't have the, for the farmer, if they're farming a hectare of land, they're just not going to get as much out, physically the mass is not going to come out. So as we as a brewer make that choice and decision, it's a great choice and decision, but it's going to cost a little more. And that's important to know. So we're going to, we see, I think that these varieties, we see some different flavors. Could we look to a modern variety that maybe has been bred now, swinging back towards optimization for all malt use and to build some flavors that are similar? Yeah, absolutely.
Are there some of those that are out there on the market right now, and barley varieties now being developed and grown in the U.S. that you find offer some of those flavor opportunities at, say, a higher yield per acre that allows for the agronomics of the whole piece to be more attractive to maltsters, and result in a better aggressive price for you all as a brewer?
Yeah, I think about some of the varieties that are being played with right now. You think about the great work that Pat Hayes out of Oregon State University has been doing with things like Full Pint. These are barleys that are bred much more for flavor, and they're utilizing some of that genetic stock. I will tell you that, you wish you could flip the switch and say, like, here's where we're going and let's get it there tomorrow. The process of developing, assessing, commercializing, and getting up to appreciable volume for a given barley variety is every bit of 10 years and maybe a little bit more. So it's a big battleship to turn. It's slow moving, but it's definitely moving. I look at some of the other varieties that are being brought over right now, things like, from Europe, things like I've always been a big proponent of Purpino. Violetta, I think, has some pretty interesting stuff happening with it.
Let's talk a little bit about craft malt. I mean, I know this is something that is on the mind of quite a few craft brewers. The idea of brewing with malt that is at least regionally grown or locally grown helps tell this story of craft beer in terms of local ingredients, and it speaks to them. Obviously the challenge in that is, depending on where you are in this country, is building, finding these varieties that work on that kind of agronomic level, with that make sense for the farmers, that can yield enough, that also produce flavor, that also then, convert in a brew house. I mean, it's a whole bunch of factors that have to align to help to make this kind of thing work. Talk to me a little bit about, from your perspective, how that is going in America right now.
There's such interesting stuff happening there. I do think that hyper regionalism, being able to say like all these materials for this beer came from this, defined locus, is fantastic. There are certainly challenges there. I think back, Michigan was a really big barley growing state at one point, and then that, by and large just left. At Bell's, we bought a barley farm. I don't know, was it every bit dozen years plus ago, and we ran that for many years, and we found out a couple things. One that
you bought a barley farm.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Is that like a Matt Damon movie? Like we bought that's we bought a zoo. Never mind. Yeah.
And we, the things that we found out are, one, that we're not very good farmers, and that nature is fickle, and so as we would take and manage this, and we had, I'm sure the Matt Damon film was probably an uproarious cavalcade of mistakes, and I think we had all of that and more. You name it, it was, but and then you take that, and then you have that focus of then turning that raw material barley into malt, and that's a whole different challenge. Michigan, we've got some really cool stuff happening right now. If you go up in the Traverse City area, there's a couple malt houses up there that are doing some pretty interesting stuff. Allison Babb out at Empire, she's got this little Saladin box, and it's really kind of lovely to see all this. And making pretty interesting malts. Now, do the malts look different than they do if they were coming from, the high dry areas of Idaho? Absolutely. But boy, if you're in the Traverse City area and you have the opportunity to drink beer that all those ingredients were drawn from within 20 miles, that's a fantastic story.
You work with these from time to time, and I remember a number of years ago, when we came up to the Brewers Retreat, you had grabbed a bag of Troubadour malt from right here in Fort Collins to make some, we were brewing 15-gallon batches, so it was a small kind of thing. But you kind of walked through that process of kind of tasting and trying to understand this malt. For brewers that want to kind of play in this field, what should their process look like as they are evaluating these malts and moving beyond just that spec sheet and trying to figure out what this is going to do in their beer?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, with when we're talking about malts, specs are pretty cool. One of the best pieces of of assessment kit that's out there is your senses. Looking at it, smelling it, chewing it, and chewing it which is different than tasting it, but tasting it. And when I say chewing it, like if you put that in your mouth and it's got sort of hard ends, steely ends, that's an indication that barley maybe isn't fully modified. So even just that physical act of chewing is important. Years ago I was doing some work with the Cicerone program, and I would lay out these different materials for them to assess, and there would be people who kind of stick their middle finger in there or their index finger in there and kind of stir it around and kind of look at it and kind of tell me, I said, what you tell me about this malt? And they'd kind of stir there. all I wanted to do was just put it in your mouth, chew it, man, come on. It's all there. So I mean, just tasting it, I think is super important. And these are the tools that brewers used for the first 9,900 years, right? It's like somehow in the last 100 we've decided that the machine's much smarter than I am. I don't think so.
So taste, evaluation, are there other kind of, keys to these kinds of things that, that could help a brewer evaluate past that just, kind of sensory level on this?
Well, I think, again, having that conversation with the maltster, understanding it, taking a look at different lots and looking at some of the analytical, even making sure that there is analytical done, will tell you, is this consistent? And, again, I'll hark back to the statement earlier about the need for us to make consistent beer. Really hard to put different things in and get the same thing out.
Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about your approach to building a production at Bell's.
Sure.
You mentioned that Larry Bell wanted to build a new brew house back in 2001, and brought you on board to do that. You went about this in a rather unconventional way compared to typical systems for brewing, and have built a very specific brew house for Bell's that brews in a way that you wanted to brew for the beers that Bell's makes. Talk to me a little bit about that process of thinking about what the production is and building that kind of capital infrastructure in order to make those beers.
Yeah, so when you walk in the brew house at Bell's, it really, there's a real story there that gets just told visually. And, the way this kind of came about was when we were building the brewery out, Larry has always been a very, very capable business person. And when he got together the money to put this, to build this brewery, when we were brewing at Bell's, we were under 30,000 barrels. Larry, what do you want to brew? I said, well, what do we want to build this new brewery for? He says, well, you've got, this chunk of money. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was, a good chunk of money. And I want to be able to make 60,000 barrels. And okay, well, that's going to be a stretch. But, the work I did at Yuengling, when we built out the brewery at Yuengling, we used a lot of, some people would call it used, some people would call it pre-owned. I call it pre-troubleshot because, so, going out there and finding this equipment that
battle tested.
Yes, exactly. It's going to work because it worked somewhere once before. So what I did when we built that brew house, I went out looking for brewing equipment, and originally in the mid 80s or late 80s, Wolfgang Puck built a brewery down in Los Angeles, and that thing operated for a few years. It was called Eureka. It was, a brewery before its time. But, about the time of like the whole Rodney King, terrible riots that occurred then, like this thing closed down. The whole thing got packed up and got Anheuser-Busch ended up buying it. And they put it away in a warehouse in Joliet, Illinois, like 1 million square foot, just weird warehouse. And somebody clued me into it. I went down there and took a look at it, and it felt a lot like, that final
scene.
It
feels like Raiders of the Lost Ark, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like opening up these crates and like, what is this? And it was really well cared for, like put together, put away well. And it was a Steinecker brew house, which was, at the time there was only a couple of them.
Man.
The other one was Red Hook had the mate to this thing. So, bought this brew house for a very fair price, and then proceeded to put it together. It was a 3-vessel system. It had a mash tun, a mash conversion vessel. It had a lauter tub, and then it had a kettle whirlpool. And so we installed it. But when we installed it, like I knew I wanted to build out. I'd done some work. I published a technical paper in the Master Brewers back in, mid 90s maybe, about how you design breweries for expansion possibilities, and use some of those principles for putting it in. So, we were ready to go. Like when it was time to grow, we had the space, the physical space to do it. So, what did we put in? The next piece of equipment that we put in was a whirlpool. Right now when we first started up, I want to say it was something like 4 hours and 4.5 hours, something like that, between brews to get this through. And I had 3 brewers, each working first, second, third shift, and was time to make more beer. So we put a whirlpool in, and we cut the cycle time, and then oh, you know what? Maybe we put in another vessel. And we ended up with the system as it eventually was dressed out. ended up with, all the milling equipment, mash conversion vessel. The mash conversion vessel would send it to either the east or the west lauter tub. That lauter tub would then go to a holding vessel, like a little, it was not a pre-run tank per se, but, kind of pre-run tank, just to make up some extra time. Then it would flow into a heating kettle. And that heating kettle, we'd get the wort up to temperature. And that had a very unique boiling system. And then when it was time to boil the beer,
what was unique about that?
Well, it was an external calandria. It was like shaped like a giant corkscrew inside of a steam chest, so that you would turn on a pump. It would take liquid, the wort from this vessel, put it through a pump, put it through this corkscrew, steam heated corkscrew, and then eject it back into the vessel again. And it was ripping through there, which, I think about wort dynamics and what we're trying to do in terms of building large structures of protein that we're then going to be able to efficiently pull out in the whirlpool. And, by ripping it through there, we're going to just be tearing apart these structures that we're working very hard to build. So, though that doesn't really hurt it as it is heating up, it would hurt it as it's boiling. So on the boiling side, when it then moves to the boiling kettle, we looked at, trying to be as gentle as possible and as versatile as possible in handling that wort. And what we ended up with was this sort of mishmash of a close coupled external calandria. So think about a shell and tube heat exchanger bolted onto the bottom of a vessel. And by setting up the piping in a way, we were able to move all the wort through the boiling surfaces with no pump energy. So what they call thermosiphon, pretty gentle. And then it would would move through there, get heated up, and then it would rise up through the liquid column. And what that allowed us to do was, number one, we could boil with a huge variety of kettle volumes, because sometimes we're brewing Expedition Stout, and other times we're brewing Oarsman or Light Pilsner or whatever. And you want to be able to to make all of those various brews in a way that's pretty efficient. And there was some pretty cool engineering that went into it. We ended up doing like computer modeling on it, and it was in the end it was patentable technology that we just put in the public domain, because we're brewers, we're not engineers, and it's just sort of our main revenue source. So pre-run kettle or heating kettle, boiling kettle, whirlpool, and then out. And in the end, I remember the final year we built out a new brew house that we can run 200 barrels on. This was a 50 barrel brew house. But in that final year, we shipped something like 174,000 barrels off of a 50 barrel system, which works out to something like 4,000 suds. Or we were brewing at a rate of like 16 a day. So like, a week with 100 brews. Yeah, whatever. It was crazy town. It was like, don't break. When we finally shut that thing down, I thought it was going to be like the car at the end of the Blues Brothers when they close the door and the whole thing just falls apart. I was like, that's what's going to happen here. And it's a really good brew house. But it developed some interesting and unique stuff that we still hold on to, to this day. I've now got a little tiny, 12 barrel pilot system with that same sunken deep tube calandria. That's kind of like our technology. It's kind of a goofy thing.
So what did you replace it with? And obviously, when you're making that much beer, you've got to find an even more productive way. And you're now even double where you were when you left that system at this point, right?
Yeah. So that 50 barrel system, this last year we made just shy of 500,000 barrels out the door.
Wow.
So we put in, I think it was 2012, we built a new brew house, which was a 200 barrel brew house. Went and talked to all the major players, showed them what we were looking to do. And in the end, GEA Hupman was going to be the partner for us, and I'm very happy with that. So we run that 200 barrel system. We still run that 50 barrel system. And those differ by a factor of 4. And when we put in a new pilot system last year, or 2018, I guess, we put it in as a quarter of the size of the 50 barrel. So we've got the ability to like scale up by multiplying by fingers, by 4. Because we,
it's easy math.
Yeah, exactly. I can do that. So I mean that those systems are just fantastic right now.
Right. So you all have been engaged in a kind of process of innovation. One of the beers you guys released recently was Bell's Official. You guys are mass producing a hazy IPA, and I'm only bringing this up because we're drinking some hazy IPA here. And I went through that normal process of, hey, what beer is John Mallett going to want to drink while we're here? And naturally, the thought is, oh, Pilsner. Every brewer wants to drink Pilsner. And you threw me for a loop when you was like, hey, let's drink something hoppy and hazy. It floored me, and now I just struggle to find some for us to drink. Talk to me a little bit about brewing that on the kind of scale that you brew, because certainly building something like haze stability and malt character and kind of producing the kind of volume of hops that you have to do for this kind of thing, making sure that those fermentations using this kind of yeast at that kind of scale, brewing in a 200 barrel brew house. These are all sorts of different kinds of challenges that, compared to what most brewers that are brewing these kinds of styles at much smaller scales are facing. Talk to me a little bit about that kind of, production challenge of brewing hazy, stable beer at that kind of scale.
Yeah, well, it's funny, this the haze craze that's gone on. Like, oh my God, haze. When I came to Bell's, by far the largest brand was Oberon, which is hazy.
It's true. So you have some experience doing this.
It's like, and it's like, hey, hazy beer's in. Okay, right. So we've had certainly had experience or some focus on that over time. Building in the sort of haze stability, I think, is really interesting. And I will tell you that for us, it's a whole different game to make hazy beer and then to make hazy beer and ship it across the country. Because, how is it moving through the marketplace? How do you assure that? And that's an important part because, eventually, until we find the anti-gravity disc to cement on the bottom of every package, these are physical forces.
Yeah.
I think that the haze thing, I come from my lineage is about technical professors. So, university professors of chemistry, of biochemistry, of biology, of chemical engineering. Like this was the family business. And my grandfather, who was like sort of a huge expert on sugar crystallization, was a physical chemist. And physical chemistry has to do with things like stuff settling out of solution. And so knowing just like, here are the primary physical forces that are going to want to make beer drop bright, it was really interesting to look at this, to figure out, like, how do you do this? How do you maximize the ability for these beers to stay consistent and hazy? I will tell you that our lab team, which includes, some PhDs, there were a lot of people working on this.
Sure.
I think I gave, Andy Farrell is one of the, is our innovation manager, brewing innovation manager, fantastic brewer, like really super technical. And I think that when we were doing that, it about killed him. He did yeoman's work on making great beer, and we're very happy with where it's at. But some of this is about how what are the raw material selection?
Right.
God, I wish, like right now you go to the brew house and I'll tell you, you throw some oats in, you throw some oats in your beer, no big deal. Well, doing that at like brew after brew after brew at the 200 barrel scale, like you got, like we care about our brewers, and it's like, how do we do this in a way that we're not just killing them, opening bags and dumping oats in or whatever else, that's even that becomes a bit of a challenge.
Sure. So what do you solve for that?
What?
Do you have a?
What? Huh?
And this
What are you talking
This is
about?
where John Malick gets cagey and avoids the question.
Yeah, I mean, we did. I mean,
Sure.
I mean, everything. There's a whole host of things that are out there. I think that some of the work that I think has been really important for us has been looking at like some of the stuff like John Paul May.
Okay.
Has done, and this is about the small elements in hops that are getting into beer and how they're staying in there, and how do you maximize that. So I think that there's some clues certainly there. Talking to, it's funny. Again, we make wheat beer that's hazy, and it's not, it's a different wheat beer than the German Weizen beer. If you talk to the Germans, they know how to make hazy Weizen beer. A lot of those beers are not, they're Hefeweizens, but they might not have, the yeast is not what causes the haze. It's protein. One of the ways they do it is through this thing called protein cracking, which is they would send a beer with, some protein in it, certainly, through a heat exchanger, through a flash pasteurizer, and just, kind of nuke it. And it will cause a permanent haze. Now, that's a great idea, except for the fact that, if you're making hazy hoppy beers, and that haze is an indicator, visual indicator for the beer lover that the beer is going to be hoppy, and that's the kind of thing that just destroys hop flavor. So, looking at that, looking at all kinds of, I'll tell you, at one point I went down and talked to people who make stuff like rum chata, which is, again, you look at rum chata, and I've never drank it. I've seen people drink it, but I don't want to drink it. And that stuff has got this milky opalescence. Milk, right? So these are, milk has got suspension in it that allows it to be hazy. These are all some of the same physical forces, but what they're acting on are different. So again, I'm being a little, I'm not giving away everything, but I'll tell you, it was quite a journey.
No, I imagine it was. Talk to me a little bit about that, the malt components in these beers, if you will. I'm curious about that. I think, we focus on hops varieties a lot. We focus on, how many times you're dry hopping and what kind of dry hopping loads. We're talking about, and I imagine you probably see it too with the way that you dry hop these beers, a little bit of that hops creep and, some additional re-fermentation with the enzymatic activity from those kinds of hops. But I would love to hear from your perspective, like how you build a malt base for some of these hazy beers, and then how you deal with some of these other, production concerns that come with these beers.
Yeah. So on the malt base, I think it's some of these other adjuncts are very important to put in there. Beer by itself wants to clear. A barley beer wants to clear. I mean, that's the reason why Germans lagered beer, right? Because it got clear and beautiful. So the other components, whether that is oats or other cereal grains that are in there, that's important. I think the yeast is important. We see some pretty interesting stuff with that.
Are you all public about what yeast you use in this?
No.
Oh, okay.
We play around a little bit.
All right. Are you using what people might suspect you would use?
No,
you're not.
No.
Okay.
No. How's that for double confusing, right? I'm just going to keep telling you no.
Okay.
And then what else was I going to say?
So no London L3 or Conan on this one.
So then the hops are, getting the hops in, that's important. How you handle the beer, getting it, getting it into package, because again, once it's sitting in that tank, what does that sequence look like? And we aggressively manage that. I mean, we're pretty good with managing the process timelines, because time is a variable for like things like Two Hearted. So again, managing that, absolutely very important in terms of getting it out there in a stable way. So
We still didn't talk about malt character in that whole beer.
Well,
what's your goal for malt character in the hazy beer?
Well, I mean, if you had a beer that was just, was all hop, any beer that's all hop is kind of bland and boring to me. You need something to play with there. You need. I really think the beer doesn't really come together until you've got, right water chemistry, great yeast expression and consistent great yeast expression. And then the malt sitting behind those hops. We've all steeped hops in water, and you taste that, and you're like, time for the rotary tongue scraper to reset the old palate.
Sure.
And so, malt is, as was said, 100 years plus ago, malt is the soul of beer. I mean, malt is where all of your body, your foam, your alcohol, like all of these CO2, all of these things that define beer come from malt. It may not be the flashy one, but it's absolutely imperative to have it. And if you have something on a malt that's pretty bland in flavor or overly aggressive in enzymatic activity, then I just don't see that the beer is going to be good, and especially in these hazy beers.
Yeah. In the broader world of craft beer, in the broader world of craft brewing, what excites you these days? What is, making your spidey sense tingle, and, what kind of keeps you moving forward and pushing through this? You've been in this game a long time. You've seen a lot of phases of this. Certainly you have every right to be jaded by it, but you're clearly not. What is it that, kind of keeps you interested, intrigued, and keeps you going back at this day after day?
I just look at the beers that continue to come out. There's a huge variety and range, and, you think about, 5 years ago, if you had talked to me about some unknown yeast from Norway, right? I'd be like, what?
Quake.
And,
sure.
I mean, these are the kinds of things that are like, holy crap, let's get all over this. Check this out, So these are, it's surprising to me that you sort of think like, well, everything must have been discovered by now, but it's not. I think that, sort of the hop aromas. I think about the ability to apply genetic tools to breeding for, any of our raw materials. That's super exciting. You look at things that are happening overseas, and the manifestations of how beer is being approached. You go to Brazil, and you've got these fantastic weird woods and fruits you've never heard of, and brewers who are fearless at throwing them into, we're going to make sour beer with this. And you're like, not all of those beers come from a technical excellent background, but people are pushing the boundaries of like what is, how beer can taste. And I think that is just super interesting. So, going and turning over stuff and seeing what other flavors we can get in beer. I will put the caveat that it needs to be safe. We have, as brewers, we have a duty. We are duty bound and honor bound to make sure that what we're producing is safe for our consumers. So these are the things that really light me up.
It makes a lot of sense. Hey, John Mallett, thanks for joining me on the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast.
It is such a pleasure to come by, drink a couple beers, and
I would normally ask where people find you if you want to learn more about the brewery, but your Bell's Brewery. If they want to learn more about what you do in particular, is there a place to find you specifically out there on the interwebs? I'm like everywhere. I do work with the Brewers Association, the Master Brewers, the American Malting Barley Association, Hop Quality Group. If it has to do with technical brewing, I'm all over it. Kickstart your innovation with Old Orchard Craft Juice Concentrates. G&D Chillers is ready to meet your challenge. SS Brewtech's team have strong and diverse functional backgrounds, and Second Kitchen provides food experiences to keep customers in your tap room. John, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Cheers, man.
Cheers. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.